Hello, pure souls. Welcome to Healings. This channel make your soul more pure. Today we gonna see 4 ways to get back up after a major failure. Number 1. In most cases, failure doesn't just appear out of the blues. Failure is a direct result of something you did or failed to do. Either you didn't prepare enough, you overlooked some important factors, you took too big a risk, or maybe you trusted someone you shouldn't have. Whatever the case, there was some reason behind your failure. Understanding the reason why you failed is the first step to dealing with failure and getting back up. Go back to the circumstances leading up to the failure and try to understand what exactly went wrong. Look at each of the steps you took and figure out which of them contributed to the failure. When we experience failure, the natural response for most of us to blame and judge ourselves. We berate ourselves and convince ourselves that we were destined to be failures. However, when you dissect the situation to understand what went wrong, you shift your mindset from blaming the failure on yourself to the specific action or inaction that led to the failure. This makes it a lot easier for you to deal with and overcome failure. For instance, let's say you were trying to build a profitable online store, but you've finally been forced to shut it down due to poor sales. This failure might leave you feeling like an incompetent person who was never destined to be an entrepreneur. After analyzing the circumstances leading up to closing down your business, however, you might realize that the actual problem is that you ignored that competitor you thought was too small until it was too late. Once you realize that your business failed as a result of ignoring your competitor and not because you were destined to be a failure in business, it becomes a lot easier to move on from the failure. According to research by Ethan Kross and Osla Matic, analyzing the situation as if it happened to someone else instead of yourself can make it easier for you to objectively look at the situation without getting too caught up in the negative emotions that accompanied the failure. This is something the researchers refer to as self-distancing. Number 2. Forgive yourself. Imagine that someone close to you, such as a sibling or a very close friend, made a mistake that cost you a major business deal or led to the loss of money. While you'd certainly be cross with them, you'd also understand that no one is perfect and that everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Eventually, you'd forgive them for their mistake because you understand that their mistake doesn't define them. The ironic thing is that, while we can forgive others, most of us find it very hard to forgive ourselves. When we make a mistake, instead of forgiving ourselves like we would have forgiven others, we define ourselves by our mistake. It is impossible to move on from failure without forgiving yourself. Therefore, after you have identified the mistake that led to the failure, remind yourself that you are not perfect and forgive yourself for making the mistake. If you want to get back up from a failure, you first have to forgive yourself. Number 3. See what you can learn from your failure. While failure is generally considered to be something negative, I believe there is something positive about failure. To me, failure is a feedback mechanism. It tells us that there is something about our approach or strategy that is not working. By figuring out what failure is trying to tell you, you can turn it into a learning opportunity. Trying to see what lessons you can learn from your failure will prevent you from making the same mistakes again in the future, which will increase your chances of success in similar endeavors in the future. For instance, let's say that you ended up closing your business because you made the mistake of partnering with someone who was not committed to the business and instead contributed to running it to the ground. Next time you set up a business, you will either go at it alone or exercise greater caution when picking a partner, and therefore, you're less likely to end up with another uncommitted partner who could run your business to the ground. Some of the strategies you can use to turn failure into a learning opportunity include reevaluating your planning, reevaluating your preparation, reevaluating your execution, and focusing on the variables that were under your control. Aside from preventing you from repeating the same mistakes, viewing your failure as a learning opportunity shifts your mindset. You stop viewing the failure as a negative thing and embrace the lessons that it has taught you. This makes it a lot easier to get back up and move forward. Number 4. Focus on your strengths. When we experience major failures, our instinct is to peg the failure on some inadequacy on our part. While this is somewhat true, the failure was most probably caused by something you didn't do right. It doesn't mean that you are inadequate in every aspect of life. You still have your key strengths and things you're good at, and by focusing on these strengths, you can chart a path to move you forward from failure. Apple founder Steve Jobs provides a good example of the importance of focusing on your strengths after a major failure. Jobs hit rock bottom when he was ousted from Apple, the company he had founded with his friend Steve Wozniak. However, instead of drowning in self-pity, Jobs quickly shifted his focus on his strengths. He was a talented innovator who was great at coming up with new ideas for next-generation computers and devices, and this is the strength he focused on. After his ouster, Jobs quickly founded another computer company known as Next. A few years down the line, Apple would end up acquiring Next from Jobs, and eventually, Jobs made his way back to Apple as the CEO. And the rest, as they say, is history. Just like Steve Jobs, after experiencing a major failure, don't sulk and drown yourself in self-pity. Instead, make a list of your strengths and come up with a plan on how you're going to capitalize on these strengths to move forward and get past your failure.